Alright, now we have it in the quote-unquote laboratory for its surgery to find out what's causing the clicking sound you saw in the previous video and to see why this drum doesn't rotate smoothly. This has a completely intact rubber pad. It has not been worked on nor opened by the person that sent it to me. I'm going to use a spudger. Some people might know what these are. You can get them online. They're really cheap. They're great for popping open cases, cell phones, etc. To start scraping away this rubber to see if there's any access points inside. Just going to start working on one edge and then work my way in to where I can see something. Like right here, I can see there's a notch with wires for the light up of the pumpkin. You might choose to do this with a razor. I don't recommend it because a razor will cut the rubber. I'm trying to salvage the rubber so we can re-adhere it. Alright, I can see this has got a centerpiece that has been glued in. Alright, completely off in one piece, reusable. You can put some tacky rubber cement on here and glue it back on when we're done. Here is the bottom. Here's the section we're going to pop out. You can see there is glue around the edges. Generally the glue is brittle and you can just pop it. You can also see this house came pre-cracked. You can see there's a crack right there in the porcelain. This is a combination porcelain and plastic or resin house. It's not solid porcelain. So we're going to see if we can just separate the glue. If not, we'll have to reheat it. Alright, the bottom's coming off. Alright, they did a really good job of gluing this on the top lip here. The bottom, easily popped, easily flexing. As you can see, this top is really tight. I don't want to break it, nor do I want to tear the wires that are right here. So, we are going to heat the glue. And then slowly work it off. As you can see, it's working. It's not a fast process. Also, don't touch the melted glue, it's hot. Demonstrated by what I just did. The reason I'm not using the spudger is because it's metal and it transfers the heat real fast. But I am going to use it here though, to try and help scrape away the hard spot of glue. Got it. Alright, now let's see what we got inside. Alright, well this one's a lot different than their other houses, at least in the Spooky Town collection. I'm sure they use the same drive mechanism on some of their Christmas stuff that has the rotating tower. It has a cable driven tower that comes off of a gearbox, which hopefully you can see right in there. Kind of similar to how a weed whacker works. Long cable runs down inside the weed whacker to spin the rotating fishing line, basically. You have your PCB board with plug-in points for all the lights and sounds, and this is what drives the pumpkin. It's a little motor with a square end that fits inside a square fitting that this spins on. This spins nice and smoothly without the motor. And I am wrong, it is actually a gear-driven sprocket. So, there's a good chance that the piece that's causing it to jump is right in here. Or over here. There's a drive shaft that runs the length, and there's two gray gears in that hole and that hole right there. And then if you look inside the hole in the center, you might see the shiny drive shaft rod. So these pumpkins are driven on a drive shaft that comes off the main motor. Let's see what it's going to take to get this thing all the way out if possible. I don't see any signs of anything broken that's causing the issue, nor do I see an easy way to remove this. So we're gonna plug it in, and I'm gonna watch the drive mechanism and see if I can see what's causing it to jog. What I'm looking at is the transmission right here to see if any of the teeth are missing. And I'm watching all the drive teeth that drive this right there. I'm going to try and zoom in a little. You can see the teeth are spinning all the way down in here, which is really hard to see. Drives the drive shaft, which is right here, which then drives this guy right here. As you can see, it's spinning just fine, and it's spinning smoothly. Yep, sound works just fine. What I'm doing is pulsating the power on and off to watch all the different teeth on the gears that are farther inside to see if any of them are cracked, chipped, or missing. There is quite a bit of gears inside this transmission. It's got its standard 4.5 volt pancake motor, which I wish I could get out to show you better, but it's all the way back in here. And I still can't see it. Unfortunately, I do not know how to remove the drive shaft for the pumpkin, and I don't feel like breaking it. So we're going to zoom back out and get a better overall picture of what's going on. There's the 4.5 volt pancake motor that runs everything. Everything that moves on this is run off of one motor, and probably the biggest transmission I've ever seen on a Lemax house. It has more than a half a dozen gears. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's got like 9 gears, which is the most I've ever seen on any of their houses or animatronic. Most of their houses would drive the pumpkin head on one motor and this on another, which is the barrel. I have several other houses that have 3, 4, 5 motors inside to run all the different motion items. What I'm doing now is I'm looking at the gear again, looking at the back side where I couldn't see the other gears to see if any of those gears are broke. And same thing, I'm pulsing the power on and off so I can rotate the gears deep within and see if I see any missing teeth. What I believe probably happened is a piece of debris probably got caught inside of this worm gear setup. This is similar to a drive shaft on a car, the rear pumpkin. The drive shaft comes in, you got your pinion gear, then you got your ring gear, which drives this square, which would be the equivalent of one side of your axle on a car. I have a funny feeling something got caught inside this. If it got caught in here, it would probably broke these gears. These gears are much thinner on the inside. So I'm thinking it was probably a piece of casting material, because there is casting defects all throughout the inside. They're not really cleaned up very well on the inside. And whatever it was had freed itself before I received it. When I got it, nothing was rattling, and it did seem to work, except it had a little bit of a jog, which the motor itself is really smooth. I do not see any jumpy motion on that square shaft. So I'm going to put the bottom back in it, stand it up, and see if it starts doing it again. If so, I'll check the race that these pumpkins spin on and see if that's what's causing it. Feels smooth in my fingers. But we'll see what's going on. That wasn't too hard. You just got to make sure you line the square hole into the square hole, or the square peg into the square hole. Yeah, it's still not smooth, so there's definitely something causing the problem. I'm thinking the problem is up here and not on the internals. Yeah, I can feel it. So, let's see if this barrel can come apart. I'm going to use the helping hands to help support excuse me, the pumpkin head, so it's not resting on the pumpkin head itself. And this barrel is held together by 3 small screws. Possible that there's a plastic casting defect or overmold that was clicking in the video, and it finally broke off, and it might still be inside the 2-piece housing, causing it to bounce or hitch. Alright, there's the 3 screws, small pair of pliers, here is the base with the square bottom for driving. It's got some clear grease on it, and there is something there in the plastic. Here's your top piece, which has got grease around the ring for the inside of the barrel, and then grease on the center. There's a triangular cog, so you know that your 3 screws are lined up. This all looks good except for that little piece of debris on the face. Smooth. Doing is going to check this barrel lip and the inner ring, see if I feel anything sticking out that will be catching on. There is some, if you can see it on the finger there, there is some black pieces, which I'm assuming is just broken pieces of plastic from painting of the roof perhaps. Right. I don't see anything in here. The inner race seems to be smooth. So unless it was just that piece of plastic that was stuck on here, and then the small pieces of black debris that was stuck on the inside of the drum that this rum's on, I don't see any reason why the thing would click and or jump. But I'm going to look into it a little further, and then we're going to reassemble it. Which, just put this in, line up the 3 holes, which is easy because it's got a triangular hole in the center, which matches the triangular boss. Screw it back in, don't over tighten it because of course it's plastic, we don't want to strip the screw holes. So I'm going to take a moment here and double check everything before I put it back together. Alright. I'm going to pause the video to reassemble it. I figured out how to disconnect the pumpkin, the head, so I could pull the transmission out and get a closer look at it. Here's it with its cover off. Here's the cover. The pumpkin has a very tight cam locked drive shaft, which cam locks on those wings right here. You can see it required some pliers to get it to break loose. All the gears on the transmission look pretty good. Here they are without the faceplate. The reason is you hear it and see it jerking is the one gear is riding up because it has no tension on it. So we'll put tension back on it. There we go. What I'm doing now is with my right hand I'm putting a little pressure on the pumpkin spinner to put some stress on the motor to see if any of these gears jump a tooth. Technically it shouldn't. This motor is driving a belt which drives that little gear right there, which in turn drives this gear, this gear, this gear. This final gear drives that, as well as the drive shaft for the pumpkins down here. Just keeping a little pressure on the gear to keep it from bouncing up. Inspecting the gear for any cracks or chips. Most of these transmissions from Lemax, they're foolproof. You can't really put the gears in the wrong spots. They don't fit. You can put them on upside down, but it makes it fairly apparent once you put the next gear on that it's backwards. Come here, you little bugger. This might be the culprit. It has some damaged teeth. What I'm doing right now is trying to remove the plastic, because the teeth actually appear to be fine. They're a little more pointy than the other ones, but it's got some plastic pieces stuck in there. So when this gear was extruded or stamped, it wasn't cleaned up. Next I'm going to turn it back on and I'm going to look right in here to watch the two pulleys to make sure they're spinning free and clear. And this little gizmo right here is an LED tester. I'm going to use it for a little green light. don't know if you can hear that clicking, but apparently there's some other problem in the remaining mechanism right here, which is held in with these 3 screws. So we're going to disassemble it a little bit further. This one I'll do on camera, since I had to figure out how to remove the drive shaft for the pumpkin head, which took me a good 10 minutes without breaking anything, and that would have just bored you all stiff. If any of you knew how to do it faster, more power to you. It's the first time I've had to disassemble this specific style house. Alright, there's the motor, there's the pulley, and there's the little drive gear that transfers the pulley into a gear. You hear the clicking? I believe that's the clicking on the video that she sent regarding this house. And I believe I see the problem. You notice the clicking went away? Clicking's back, away, back. It's going to be really hard to see. There's the drive gear that's driven off of this big pulley. Directly below this drive gear is a plastic bushing. This plastic bushing isn't seated all the way, and it has a piece of plastic sticking out the side. So when I turn it on, as you can plainly hear it spinning, and I take a small screwdriver and I put pressure on the plastic bushing, pushing the tab down, it's quiet. Loud. Quiet. Except for my thumb hits it. So, the pressed in plastic bushing is out of alignment. Now we need to see how to take this apart to clean up that bushing. This shaft goes all the way through, should be splined on both sides. Just need one side to come off. So, to prevent any damage to the belt, I'll take the belt off first. If you ever break these little bad boys, you can use them out of CD players, or you can get what they call horse ties, which are really small rubber bands. They come in colors, black, white, and they're almost the exact same size, as you can see in my fingers. But it's called a horse tie. They're basically rubber bands for horses, for their manes. I find they come in handy when repairing the belt-driven mechanisms in a Lemax house. What I'm trying to do is figure out the best way to try and pop one of these off without damaging it. I'll zoom back out so you can actually see what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm spinning the pulley with my finger at the same time using the spudger to slowly separate or lift the gear in a slow prying motion off of the spline section, which it is doing. Voila. Alright. And we'll try and zoom in again. Probably making you all seasick and annoyed. That's pretty good. Right there is the piece of plastic that was sticking up, smacking the gears. Sorry about that interruption. Apparently the battery died. So anyhow, where I left off was here's the plastic bushing. With the casting defect. So zoom back out. And try and focus in. And you can see it's obvious right there on the end. Pardon my dirty hands. I work for a living. There is what's clicking. And it's jagged, and that's probably what was clicking prior and then finally broke off. And that's why the loud clicking that was heard is not clicking loud anymore. But since we have it apart, we're going to check all the plastic bushings. This one as well has a casting defect. It's not as large as the other one. Nonetheless, it's still there and needs to be resolved. I'm looking for some small little cutters. Do this kind of stuff, these flush cutters are nice and they're very inexpensive on eBay. A lot of people use them for jewelry making. It's good for small wiring, electronics wise, and because they cut flush, it's good for this kind of stuff where you can remove plastic over castings. Alrighty, we're going to put this back together and see if it clicks. That one's popped in. That one's popped in. Here's the pulley. Slide that guy right in. Try not to lose anything. Carefully press the gear back on. Once I get it on with my finger or thumb, I take 2 thumb fingernails and I slowly push equally to where the gear is seated up approximately where it was before. Put the pulley band back on, or the belt. I usually rotate it by hand a couple of times to check the tension. And now we're going to give it some power. Nice. But it's rubbing. So, just going to lift the edge a little. That should do. You can see, or kind of see, that it's spinning, in case you can't see it. There you go, there's your noise. No clicks. Let's reassemble the transmission. Voila. It should be. Okay. There's also a bushing on this end for that drive gear. And this bushing as well has the overcasting. So we're going to trim it. If you don't have a set of flush cut pliers or anything, you can carefully do it with a razor knife, razor blade, X-Acto, etc., or sandpaper. You can never go wrong with sandpaper. Just make sure that your sanding debris, your dust, your grit, does not get inside the transmission, since these are lightly oiled. Okay, transmission's back together. I'm just going to hold it together and turn it back on. Other than me touching it with my thumb, nice and quiet. So we're going to screw it back together and then put tension on it by reassembling and seeing if there's any problems with it clicking. Now, it doesn't want to pop back into place because this big gear right here that drives the pumpkin head also lines up with this drive shaft. So when you slide it onto its bosses, you have to adjust the gear, rotate it carefully, so that it sits flush. And it is nice that Lemax uses magnetic screws. transmission cover is secured enough that I can now screw it to its mounting plate. It'll be just a moment. To save on costs, Lemax does use a lot of the same drive systems in multiple items. So there's a chance that you'll run into this specific one again, especially if you probably have the one with Santa Claus's telescope where he can see out, because it has a rotating snow globe on the top. So, last screw. All back together. All the gears are spinning, and she's just humming along. So let's cam lock in this bad boy, and then hook up the base to the pumpkins, and make sure it works while it's under its own load. Stand over here to help support the house so it doesn't break any of the figurines or accessories off. Now, this is a square shaft, and that's a square hole, so you gotta rotate it to where the shaft and the hole mate. You can either rotate the transmission, but since there's no stress on it, you can just rotate the pumpkin head, which is out of frame, of course. Typical. Put that on, and I will tell you, a pair of pliers is your best friend right here, especially if you have fat fingers. Slide it on, and then rotate it till it pops into place. It'll get really tight, and then it clicks. And that's it. So the pumpkin is now hooked back up. Now we're going to carefully, at least try to be careful, push the rest of this back together. Wires inside, make sure they're not caught in anything, which apparently it is. Alright, sorry for that delay there. Had a wire that got tangled up. Had to get it out carefully. Figured you didn't want to sit there and watch me remove everything to get the caught wire out, because that probably would have been another boring couple of minutes for you. Alright, so it's all all back together. I know you have a hard time seeing it because you're staring at the top of it. But the aerial view, you can see this guy spinning smooth and that guy spinning a lot better. And it's absolutely whisper quiet. You probably can't even hear it on that dead silence right there. So, from what I could see inside, the clicking was the 3 bushings inside the transmission for the gears that drive everything, as well as debris from casting inside the barrel. If you ever have one of these houses and have to disassemble them for any reason, you will see that there's a lot of internal overcasting, and that's just part of the fun. It's just not cost effective to clean it all up. So what we're going to do is we're going to glue this back in. I'm going to remove the old glue, glue it back in. Old glue. Re-adhere the sticker on the bottom, the foam pad that says Lemax, and then package it back up and ship it back to its owner. I'm sure she'll be happy to get her investment back and cleaned up and functioning. Since anybody that collects these knows, once they're gone, they get expensive online. Because if you didn't buy them when they came out, you'll either find them online for ridiculously high prices, or occasionally you get lucky and find it for less than you could have got it at the store during its release period. But for the most part, you're usually going to spend more than if you bought it at the place. Like Michael's, because this is a Michael's exclusive according to the box. So, like I said, clean off the glue, hot glue it in. So I'm just going to pause for a few moments while I finish cleaning it and get the hot glue gun warmed up to re-adhere everything. Alright, all the original hot glue has been removed. My glue gun is fired up and almost ready to go. We're going to glue this in, we're going to plug it back in, and then we're going to test to make sure that it still functions. Because anybody out there that does stuff like this understands that occasionally Murphy comes to bother you. Works great until you reassemble it. When hot gluing, try not to burn yourself. Problem with hot glue is it's, well, hot and it's sticky. So it's really hard to get off as your skin is searing underneath it. It's almost as fun as watching paint dry. So, glued on. Gonna let it sit for a second. Then we're gonna let it get tacky. And we're going to make sure that it still works. Makes a little bit of a sound when I tip it because it's not designed to be tipped. You can see the drive shaft spinning beautifully. And the noise still works. So, I'm going to let the hot glue solidify. We're going to clean up the edges and all the little strings that it makes. Anybody that hot glues is fully aware of these wonderful strings. And then we're going to come back and get this finished up. I'll be back in a moment. Alright, I went ahead and scraped off the glue. I'm going to re-adhere the mat. See if there's enough stickiness left on here to do it. Which it appears there is. Smooth it on in. Perfect. In case you're wondering how I remove the glue from the bottom, I use an X-Acto knife or a cheap Chinese replica with a scraper or chisel blade. That way I can go flush against the bottom and scrape flush all the way around the porcelain and plastic edge so there's no high spots in the glue. One last test. Spinning. There we go. So until next time, this has been the Random Junk Channel. Any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. Here's a little addendum to the video. During its test procedure, letting it run for about 20 minutes, it started to do a minor click with the sound off. So I opened up the bottom again and took a look to see what was going on. And I have resolved the problem. As you can hear, it's not clicking, not making any sounds except for just the hum of the motor and the noise made by the transmission. On the very bottom of the unit, there are two rectangles. Inside these rectangles is the gear for the drive shaft. This one here comes off of the transmission. This one turns the pumpkins. These two rectangles are not big enough. The gear actually does sit inside these rectangles and just a little bit, maybe a 32nd of an inch. What I ended up doing, because there is play in this drive shaft, you can move this drive shaft back and forth. I'm looking for a screwdriver to show. I don't know if you can see, but I can move the gear. What I ended up doing was taking a very sharp razor knife or hobby knife, X-Acto knife, whatever you may want to call it, and trimmed it. This, what I used. What I did on this side, which is the side with the transmission, I trimmed the edge closest to the reinforcement for the transmission. On this side, which is the side that drives the pumpkin, I trimmed the inside edge because it has a stopper going to the outside edge. So I trimmed a little off of here without hitting the bushing for the gear, and I trimmed this outer edge one until I can move the gear back and forth without it touching the plastic housing. Once that was done, I let the unit run for 30 minutes and with no problems. No clicking, nothing. Just the hum of the motor and the sounds made by two parts sliding together. Since there is no bushings or anything on the actual spinning pieces, it just spins on a flat plastic disc that's got grease. As you can see, and as you can hear, quiet. So if you have this unit and it's clicking, or you have this unit and it's bouncing or it's bound up, the first thing I would do before tearing it apart is peel off the rubber foot and check those two plastic gears that are spinning right there and make sure they're not rubbing against the base. So, little bonus fact or something to check. But the tolerance that is in there works great if the drive shaft didn't have any play. You can take it apart and put bushings in the drive shaft to take up the slack. That's more trouble and pain than it's worth. Sticking in a set of bushings would work, but trimming the plastics faster and has the same result in the end. Everything spins, nothing clicks, no binding, you're good to go. As before, any questions or comments, leave them below.